Number 4 asks us to describe 4 examples of non-Mendelian genetics. So those are things that are a little bit different than our usual dominance and recessive things that we learned about so far. One of the examples is incomplete dominance, and that's what we call during the semester, we call that the paint can effect, where a red flower and a white flower would mix together, and instead of one of those colors being dominant over the other, you would get what's called an intermediate phenotype. And an intermediate phenotype means you get like a whole different color altogether. So that's intermediate phenotype. Okay, so there's your incomplete dominance. Co-dominance, we've seen questions about co-dominance on the Keystone exam every time, even though we don't look at the questions or anything like that. They've been in the sample packet that PDE has supplied us with, and that's why we use it as a short answer question on the exam. But co-dominance is like your roan cow or your speckled hen, and this is where you would have a white cow and a red cow. Their offspring would be like patchy looking, you know, or a speckled hen would be a black rooster, and white hen would have speckled offspring, black and white in the phenotype of the offspring. So the Punnett square for that would be a big R for the red, big W for the white, and then the offspring would all be RW. And then if you crossed the roan cows with another roan cow, they would both be heterozygous, and you would end up with that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio again, where you have 1 red, 2 roan, and 1 white. And I think it might be pronounced roan. I don't actually know because I'm not down with my agriculture. Third, non-Mendelian genetics, polygenic inheritance. Poly meaning many, gene meaning gene. So polygenic inheritance is a phenotype that's controlled by more than one gene. These are things like blood type and skin color. More than one gene is involved in their phenotypic expression. And then the fourth type is sex-linked traits. These are carried on the X chromosome. So XX is female. You're not going to see the sex-linked traits in females most of the time. It's very, very rare because you would need to have an X which has the trait in question and then a Y chromosome. So you only see these traits express themselves in males. This is on page 14 of your reading packet. And if you're confused about your sex-linked traits, please take a closer look at page 14 because it shows you some really good crosses of how you can be a carrier mother and end up with a son who's affected with a sex-linked trait, whereas if you're a non-affected mother but an affected father, you don't have a son who's affected with the trait, but you do have carrier daughters. So like we said in class, if you have baldness or color blindness or any of those sex-linked traits, they're inherited from your mom's side of the family because they're carried on the X chromosome. Page 5. This is a Keystone question, sample question. Which statement best describes the outcome of both meiosis and mitosis? And the correct answer is A. Cell division results in daughter cells that contain DNA. B is wrong because B is referring to something that only occurs during mitosis. C is incorrect because this only occurs in prophase 1 of meiosis, so that's not both of those. And then D is just nah, like it just doesn't make sense as an answer. So again, a little concerning that only 43% of students in Pennsylvania last year got that question correct because I think it's an easy one. It's going to be easy for you guys, but that's that. All right. The open-ended response, what I want you to look at, and if you need to take a closer look at these, I have them in the answer key binder over by the chalkboard near my desk. But the question is, in the 1800s, Gregor Mendel published a scientific paper based on pea plant experiments. In the paper, he made the following conclusions. Traits have two possible forms, which are determined by the inheritance of two factors. One factor is inherited from each parent. One form is dominant, the other is recessive. When the offspring inherit one or more dominant factors, they will display that form of the trait. Describe how one part of Mendel's conclusion is consistent with current scientific knowledge of inheritance. So basically, it's just asking you to describe how any of these conclusions, how do they make sense? So again, I would like you to restate the question in some way in your answer. Restate the question. So Mendel's conclusion is current with scientific knowledge of inheritance because, and then pick one of these ideas and elaborate on it. Just prove that you understand it. So the responses that would receive credit. So just to get 1 point is if you mention that Mendel's factors are called alleles. We know that alleles are found on chromosomes. These are things that Mendel didn't necessarily know. We know that meiosis occurs to make sex cells. We know that a dominant trait is often caused by having an allele that codes for a protein. All right, let me look at some of the answers. So a 3-point answer would say, it is currently known that many traits are determined by alleles and that one allele is inherited from each parent. Also, it has been discovered that there are dominant and recessive alleles. I feel like all they did is restate this information that was already up here, and that was a 3-point answer. So you see how flexible the grading is with the short answers? Write something down that makes sense and demonstrates that you sort of know what you're talking about. Even if you're writing and you say to yourself, man, I feel like I'm just rewriting what they said, you're gonna get some points for that. Since Mendel's paper was published, other forms of inheritance have been discovered. Describe 2 examples of how Mendel's conclusion does not fully explain current scientific knowledge. Here you can go back into those non-Mendelian genetics. Those were things that were discovered after Mendel, and they kind of go against his principles. So one way it does not fully explain current scientific knowledge is because of codominance. Okay, so they gave one example there. Mendel thought that no matter what, each trait was either dominant or recessive, and it's been discovered that certain traits are codominant, meaning that either is dominant or recessive. And their other example is multiple alleles or polygenic traits. Some traits are not determined entirely by one allele. Some are made up of a combination of several alleles. So any of the 4 examples of non-Mendelian genetics would be the correct answer for that question. Start your answer by restating the question and you'll be good to go. All right, a 1-point answer was, when we are born, we inherit 2 factors, one from each parent. When we get the dominant factor, we display that trait. It's something. It's 1 point, okay? Write something to make sure that you get some credit for the answers. So again, if you want to take a closer look at this short answer, I have these pages with the sample answers in the binder next to my desk, this answer key binder, okay? Thank you. Good luck.